Let me ask you something. If someone stood in front of your entire world, your pack, your people, the only home you'd ever known, and told you out loud, with witnesses, that you were too much or insufficient, what would you do? Would you fight? Scream? Beg? Zora Ashvale did none of those things. She said 2 words, "I accept," and walked away with nothing but a bag on her back and a wound in her chest that felt like forgetting her own name. That was 3 years ago. And if you had told her then, standing barefoot in that clearing, mascara running, rejection bond snapping like a dead branch in dead winter, that 3 years later she would walk into her own apothecary shop, look up from her work and say, "Gosh, you both are huge," to 2 of the most powerful alphas in the Northern Territories, she would have laughed in your face. But here's the thing about the moon goddess. She doesn't forget the ones she's still cooking. She just takes her time. And what she was preparing for Zora Ashvale? Nobody, not Zora, not the alphas, not the man who rejected her, saw it coming. Nobody. And I need you to stay with me. Because this story, it doesn't go where you think it's going. Not even close. The twist that comes in Chapter 3 alone will leave you completely breathless. I promise you, you will not see it coming. So, before we go any further, if you are new here, this is your sign. Hit that subscribe button right now. Not later. Now. Because the kind of stories we tell in this space, the ones that crack your chest open and put something better back inside, you don't want to miss a single one. Like this video? Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, because I want to know who's here with me tonight. Whether it's Lagos or London, Atlanta or Abuja, Cape Town or Canada, drop your location below and let's read this together. Now, let me tell you about the girl they left in the clearing. Chapter 1. The forest of Iron Vale Pack smelled of pine and crushed ambition on the night Zora Ashvale's life ended, and though she did not know it yet, quietly, stubbornly began again. She was 23 years old. She was barefoot because the ceremony required it. Something about being grounded to the earth when the bond was spoken aloud, when 2 souls were formally tied together before the pack and the moon and whatever ancient machinery governed the lives of Wolfborn. The ground was cold. November had come early to Iron Vale that year, and the frost had crept into the soil the way bad news creeps into a room. Silently from underneath, until you feel it in your bones before you know what it is. She was wearing a white dress that the pack's elder women had stitched by hand. She had watched them do it. 3 women, old and quiet, working by lamplight at the long table in the communal hall. They had sewn it with the particular care people give to things they believe in. She had stood very still while they fitted it, and she had thought, this is what it feels like to be chosen. She had been wrong about that. The pack was gathered in a ring around the clearing. Perhaps 200 wolves, faces she had known her entire life. Elders and children, and warriors and omegas, all of them standing in the dark with torchlight throwing long shadows across the ground. They had come to witness a bonding. That was what the invitation had said. That was what everyone had believed was happening tonight. It was not what was happening tonight. Caden Voss stood across from her. She had known him since she was 7 years old. He had shared apples with her at the edge of the river. This specific memory arrived uninvited, the way the worst memories always do, right when you need your mind to be steady. He had told her once, with the total sincerity of a 12-year-old boy who had not yet learned to perform his feelings, "Zora, you're strange, but strange things are always the most interesting." She had held on to that sentence for years. She had held on to it the way you hold on to something small and warm when everything around you is large and cold. She looked at him now and searched for that boy. He was not there. What was there instead was a man of 26 with broad shoulders and cold eyes, and a jaw set so hard it looked like something he was doing on purpose, like a performance of resolve for the 200 people watching him. He was classically handsome in the way that only men who have never truly suffered are. Clean-featured, unblemished, standing with the easy confidence of someone who has never once had to wonder whether they were enough. He opened his mouth. I, Caden Voss, Alpha of the Iron Veil Pack, hereby reject Zora Ashvale as my fated mate and future Luna. The clearing went so quiet that Zora could hear the torches burning. She is insufficient. She is wolfless, and she is a stain on this pack's legacy. 3 sentences, 11 seconds, maybe 12. That was all it took. Zora counted the words later, in the dark of the first night she spent outside Iron Veil's borders. Insufficient, wolfless, stain, turning them over like stones, checking their weight, trying to understand how something so brief could reach so deep. The crowd did not gasp. That was the part that stayed with her longest, afterward. They did not gasp. They did not protest. They went quiet in the way people go quiet when someone says the ugly truth that everyone has been carefully not saying. The embarrassed silence of a room that agrees and doesn't want to admit it. Zora's wolf had never manifested. She was 23 years old, and she had never shifted, then never felt the full surge of the change move through her bones, never looked down at her hands and watched them become something else. In the world she had been born into, this was not merely unusual. It was a disqualification. It meant she could not fight, could not protect, could not contribute to the pack's strength in the ways that mattered to people like Caden Voss, who was young and ambitious and had already. She understood this now, standing in the clearing, the cold working up through the soles of her feet. Arranged a union with Riva Dorn, daughter of the neighboring Stonehelm Alpha. A strategic match. A political one. The kind that made a pack powerful instead of merely whole. Zora had been, in the architecture of Caden's future, a door that opened onto nothing useful. She had simply been in the way. She did not fight. She did not scream. She did not perform her devastation for the 200 people watching, because she had never performed anything in her life. And she was not going to start now, in a white dress, barefoot in November, with frost underneath her feet, and a crowd that had already made its decision about her. She looked at Caden for 3 more seconds. Then she said, I accept, in a voice that was quieter and steadier than she had any right to produce, and the bond between them snapped. There is no word in any human language for what a breaking bond feels like. Wolfborn, who have survived rejection, describe it differently. Some say fire, some say drowning, some say the particular horror of a sound you cannot unhear. Zora said it felt like forgetting your own name, like reaching for something so fundamental and so load-bearing in the structure of who you are and finding nothing there. Not pain, exactly. Worse than pain. The sudden absence of something you did not know you needed until it was gone. She was escorted from the clearing by 2 low-ranking Omegas who would not look her in the eye. By dawn, she was outside Iron Veil's borders with a single bag on her back. Her late mother's journal pressed against her ribs inside her coat, and the clothes she had changed into because she had left the white dress folded on the ground outside the clearing, and she was never, under any circumstances, taking it with her. She did not know it yet. Could not have known it, standing at the border in the gray early morning with her breath making small clouds in the cold air. But the moon goddess had been watching the whole time. and the moon goddess, for what it's worth, was furious on her behalf. Thorngate City was the kind of place that did not ask questions, because everyone living there was the answer to one. It sat in a neutral territory between three pack borders, half human, half supernatural. All of it loud and layered and smelling of street food and old magic, and the particular busyness of people who have decided that surviving is enough of an ambition for now. Zora arrived with $40, a bag of clothes, and the look of someone who had recently decided that hope was an inefficient use of energy. She found the apothecary on her third day. It was a small shop wedged between a dry cleaner and a place that sold, inexplicably, both custom hats and tax advice. The sign above the door read, Ogden's, herbs, tinctures, remedies, and sundries in faded lettering, and below it, in what appeared to be newer, angrier paint. No credit, no exceptions. This means you. The man behind the counter was 70 years old, half blind in the left eye, built like someone had stacked a series of complaints on top of each other until they became a person, and smelled strongly of camphor and strong opinions. He hired her within the hour because she could read the old script labels on his back shelf inventory, a skill his previous 3 assistants had lacked, and Ogden was not a man who let useful things go to waste. "You're a wolf born with no wolf," he said on that first morning, not looking up from the ledger he was annotating with aggressive red ink. "Yes," Zora said. "You know what that means in the supernatural world?" She had a list of answers to that question. Most of them were not suitable for a first day of work. That I'm useless?" she said, because it was the cleanest one. He looked up then. One good eye and one clouded one, both of them sharp as anything. "It means something's still cooking," he said. "Some things take longer in the oven. Doesn't mean the bread's bad, means the bread is ambitious." She rolled her eyes, but she stayed. She was still there 3 years later. In those 3 years, Zora Ashvale had become, by any measurable standard, completely fine. Perfectly fine. Absolutely, spectacularly, not even a little bit falling apart fine. The kind of fine that has its own quiet soundtrack and a very organized spice rack and a strict policy about not examining things too closely after 9 p.m. She had learned herbalism, lunar alchemy, and a rare discipline called supernatural anatomy healing, complex, ancient, requiring no wolf and no magic, only extraordinary patience and a willingness to sit with difficult things longer than was comfortable. Healers in Thorngate began sending her cases they could not crack. She developed a reputation. She raised her prices twice, and both times the clients came back anyway. She did not date. She did not let wolves near her beyond the professional transaction of service and payment. When one came into the apothecary, and they came regularly, drawn by reputation, she served them efficiently, charged them fairly, and maintained a careful, specific distance behind her eyes that said, "I am helpful, and I am finished," and those two things can coexist. She had also, in those 3 years, noticed something she did not speak about. Sometimes, in the deepest part of a healing session, the part where the herbal compounds opened a bridge between her awareness and the wolf soul of her patient, she touched something, not with her hands, with something that did not have a name yet, something that lived in the same part of her chest where her wolf was supposed to be. She could feel wolf souls, read them, almost. The way a person reads a face, picking up information that was never spoken aloud. She had filed this under things I will figure out eventually, and covered it with 3 years of organized routines and professional distance, and the occasional glass of wine with Ogden on Thursday evenings when he was in a tolerable mood. It was a Tuesday in November, 3 years to the month since the clearing, though she was not counting, when the door to the apothecary opened. Ogden was in the back room, conducting what appeared to be a deeply personal argument with a supplier over the phone. The words unconscionable and frankly insulting had already been deployed. Zora was reorganizing the moonwort tinctures by potency, which was a task that required concentration and also gave her something to look at that was not the clock. The bell above the door rang. She did not look up immediately. Walk-ins at this hour were usually regulars, and regulars knew to wait. Then the air in the room changed. It was not a dramatic change. It was not wind or sound or light. It was pressure. The specific, unmistakable shift in the atmosphere that happened when a true alpha entered a space. Every wolf-born felt it instinctively, something old and animal in the blood that said, "Pay attention." With a single alpha, it was notable, manageable. The air adjusted and moved on. This was not a single alpha. The air did not adjust. The air apologized. Zora looked up. 2 men stood inside her doorway. The shop was not large. These men were. The taller one had a jaw that looked carved from something that had been tested by weather for a very long time. Dark eyes that moved across the room with the quiet, automatic efficiency of someone who had spent years assessing threats and could not turn it off even in an apothecary in a neutral city on a Tuesday. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to the edge of his jaw, and he carried it the way people carry things they have stopped explaining. He moved as though every object in his path had already made its peace with accommodating him. The second one was equally large, differently so. Warm where the first was compressed. Curling dark hair pushed back carelessly from a face that was, unfairly, devastatingly handsome in the specific way that made you immediately wonder what the catch was. Laugh lines at the corners of his eyes. The easy posture of a man who was dangerous but had decided, for now, not to be. Zora's mouth opened, and then, because 3 years of careful professional silence had apparently reached some kind of structural limit, because the walls she had built so meticulously had not accounted for this particular Tuesday, Zora Ashvale said the most honest thing she had said to a werewolf in 3 years. "Gosh, you both are huge!" She clapped her hand over her mouth immediately after. The 2 men looked at each other. The warmer one, the one with the laugh lines, began very slowly to smile. And the other one, the one with the scar and the carved jaw and the eyes like deep water that had been still for a long time. He said nothing, but something moved in his face. Something that did not have a name yet. Something that Zora, for reasons she absolutely refused to examine, found that she could not look away from. We are just getting started. Chapter 2. The thing about silence is that it has texture. Most silences are thin. The ordinary pause between sentences, the brief nothing between one thought and the next. They don't weigh anything. You move through them without noticing. The silence that came out of the taller man's face was not that kind. It was dense, considered. The silence of someone who had long ago decided that words were a resource, not a reflex, and spent them accordingly. He stood in her doorway, in her small, tincture-smelling, thoroughly ordinary apothecary doorway, and looked at her with dark eyes that held something she could not immediately name, and said absolutely nothing, and somehow that was louder than anything he could have chosen to say. Zora lowered her hand from her mouth. She pulled her professional face on the way you pull on a coat in cold weather, quickly, out of necessity, hoping nobody noticed the shiver underneath. "Welcome," she said. "Can I help you?" It came out as a statement rather than a question, which was not ideal, but she was working with limited resources. The warmer one, the one whose smile had arrived slowly and was still there, settled into the corners of his mouth like it lived there permanently, extended a hand across the counter. "Grove Calloway," he said. His voice was easy, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once in his life felt the need to fill a silence he didn't want to fill. "This is Rylan Ashford. We apologize for the door." Zora looked at the door, then at the shelf beside the door, which had previously held 6 bottles of prepared tincture, and now held 4, the other 2 having apparently been displaced by Rylan Ashford's shoulder on entry. They had not shattered, fortunately. They had simply relocated, with the stunned dignity of objects that had not expected to be moved. "I'll add it to the invoice," Zora said. "Reasonable," Grove said. Rylan Ashford said nothing. He had moved further into the shop, which meant he was now standing in the middle of it, and the shop, which Zora had always considered a comfortable size, had apparently made certain adjustments to accommodate his presence. The air was doing that thing again. The apologizing thing. 2 alphas in an enclosed space created a specific atmospheric condition that Zora's wolf-born instincts registered as significant, even when the rest of her was trying very hard to register it as routine. She kept her eyes on Grove. Man, Grove was safer to look at. Not because he was less. He was not less. He was enormous and clearly dangerous in ways that his easy posture was specifically designed to obscure. But because looking at Grove did not produce the particular short circuit in her processing that looking at Rylan Ashford produced, and she needed her processing intact for whatever this was about to be. "You're looking for a lunar alchemist?" she said. "Someone who works with suppressed wolf bonds." Grove's eyebrows rose slightly. "We hadn't said that yet." "You came specifically for me. You didn't walk in and ask what services I offer. You walked in and looked at me like you were confirming something. That means someone sent you with a description. The Healing Network in Thorngate routes specialized cases. Suppressed wolf bonds are the specialty they route to this address." She set down the tincture she was still holding. "So? What's suppressed, and for how long?" Grove looked at Rylan. Rylan looked at Zora. He had not, she noticed, looked away from her since he'd finished assessing the room. Which should have felt rude, and instead felt like something she didn't have a word for yet, something she was going to need to address later when she had privacy and a cup of tea and the emotional bandwidth to examine it properly. "It's a child," Rylan said. First words he'd spoken since the doorway. His voice was exactly what she had expected, and also somehow worse. Low and unhurried, and the kind of steady that wasn't calm, so much as it was the product of long practice at containing things. 12 years old. Wolf emergence that's been blocked for 18 months. It's beginning to affect her health. Systemically? She's losing weight. The episodes are getting longer. 3 other healers? None could identify the block. Zora nodded slowly. She was already running through the diagnostic framework in her mind. The specific kind of focus that arrived when a case was genuinely interesting. The part of her that had been built in Thorngate over 3 years of difficult work, and was, she knew without vanity, genuinely excellent at this. "I'll need to see her directly. I don't work from second-hand assessments." "We know," Grove said. "We're asking you to come to Duskwall." "That's the Northern Territories." "Several hours north, yes. I'd need to close my schedule. 2 weeks minimum." Rylan reached inside his coat and slid an envelope across the counter without a word. Zora picked it up, opened it, looked at the number written inside with the careful neutrality of a woman who had learned, through practice, not to let her face do things in front of clients. She set it down and looked up. "I'll need 3 weeks," she said. Grove's smile deepened. "I like her." You like everyone, Ryland said. I like people who know what they're worth. I'll also need, Zora continued, a west-facing room. I work with lunar light for certain procedures. It's not negotiable. I'll need access to a preparation space with running water and a stone surface, not wood. And I'll need 4 days' notice before the first full session, so I can prepare the compound sequence in advance. Ryland stared at her with an expression she was beginning to understand. Was not blankness, but rather the face of a man doing significant internal processing. Fine. I'll also need... Zora. Ogden's voice detonated from the back room with the force of a man who had been listening through a deliberately cracked door. Take the job before you negotiate yourself out of it. A brief silence. I'll take the job, Zora said with dignity. Good, said Ogden, and then quieter, presumably to the supplier still on hold. Sorry about that. Where were we? Ah, yes, unconscionable. They left to bring the car around. Zora was writing the supply list she'd need to pack when she noticed from the corner of her eye, and that Ryland Ashford had paused at the door. Not for long, a half-second, maybe less. His eyes moved to the left side of her neck, where the collar of her shirt sat, where the skin was, she knew, without looking, faintly marked with the faded remnant of a bond scar. Then he walked out. Zora stared at the door for a moment. Then she went to pack. Ryland drove. This was apparently non-negotiable, and nobody discussed it. He simply got into the driver's seat with the settled certainty of a man who had made this decision before the car existed. And that was that. Grove sat in the passenger seat and talked. Zora sat in the back with her bag and her supply case and her wall, which she had reinforced during the packing process and was now in excellent condition. Monosyllables, she had decided. Professional and pleasant monosyllables for the duration of the journey, followed by 3 weeks of excellent clinical work, and then a return to Thorngate, where her life was organized and predictable, and completely spectacularly fine. This plan lasted approximately 40 minutes. The worst diplomatic incident I have personally witnessed, Grove said, in the tone of a man settling into a story he was genuinely looking forward to telling. Occurred at the Tripac Summit 4 years ago. Catered event. Very formal. Someone in the kitchen. And we have never conclusively determined who. Used a shared stockpot that had previously held a silver compound broth. Didn't clean it properly. Grove, Ryland said. She's going to hear this story eventually. Better from me. He continued without pause. 23 alphas. So all of them seated at the formal table. All of them in their best presentation. And within 15 minutes of the appetizer course, every single one of them began to sneeze. Zora kept her eyes on the window. Not politely, Grove added. Not the kind of sneeze you can absorb with dignity. Full, involuntary, eyes-watering, unable to complete a sentence sneezing. For 3 hours. The treaty that was supposed to be signed that evening was postponed because no one could hold a pen with any authority. That's not exactly... Ryland started. Ryland sneezed so hard he knocked over a candelabra. The table was poorly designed. It was a perfectly standard table. The candelabra placement was... It was the sneezing, Ryland. And Zora laughed. It arrived without warning, and the way real laughter does. Not the polite performance of amusement, but the actual thing, sudden and involuntary, startling her so completely that she pressed her hand against her mouth a full second after it had already escaped. She felt it in her ribs. She felt it in the place where the wall was, and the wall, just for a moment, developed a small structural irregularity that she immediately moved to address. She was annoyed at herself. Specifically, clinically annoyed. In the rearview mirror, Rylan Ashford's eyes found hers for exactly 1 second. She looked out the window. "So," Grove said, in a tone of perfect casual conversational transition, "who rejected you?" The laughter stopped. "Excuse me?" Zora said. "The bond scar, left side of your neck. It's faded, 3 years, roughly, but I've seen rejection scarring before. I recognize the pattern." "Grove." Rylan's voice carried a specific weight. "She's going to be in our territory for 3 weeks. She'll notice we can sense these things. I'd rather she know we know than have her wonder." He turned in the seat to face her, and his expression had changed. The easy humor still there, but underneath it, something that was genuinely, carefully gentle. "I'm not asking to pry. I'm asking so you know it doesn't change anything. Not why we hired you. Not how you'll be treated in Duskwall. Not one thing." Zora looked at him for a moment. "Iron Veil Pack," she said. 3 years ago. The Alpha." Grove nodded once. No follow-up question. No performance of sympathy. Just the nod of a man who understood that some information was complete in itself and didn't need anything added to it. "I had a good oven," Zora said quietly. Grove blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Nothing. Old joke." She turned back to the window. She did not see Rylan's hands shift slightly on the wheel. She was not looking. She had decided not to look, and she was committed to that decision, and she was going to maintain it for the entire remainder of the journey. The mountains were beginning to appear on the horizon, dark shapes against a graying sky, enormous and ancient and completely indifferent to the small, complicated things happening in cars moving toward them. She watched them grow. She did not know, could not have known. Now watching the mountains arrive from the back seat of a car driven by a man who had said approximately 14 words in 4 hours. That Rylan Ashford had spent 3 weeks before walking into her apothecary, reading every record that existed about her. Healer reports, territory registrations, the Underground Network's case files, the brief clinical notation in Iron Veil's pack records of a rejection 3 years prior, and the name of the woman it had been done to. She did not know what he had felt reading those records. She did not know that it had changed something in him before he ever walked through her door. Duskwall arrived like a memory of something Zora had never actually had. It rose against the mountain range in old stone and timber, buildings wrapped in climbing plants that had gone gold and rust with the season, a river cutting clean and silver through the middle of the settlement and catching the last of the afternoon light. It smelled of wood smoke and pine and something underneath, old and deep and settled, the smell of a place that had been home to people for a very long time and knew it. Something in Zora's chest responded to it before she could stop it. Not her mind, not her professional assessment. Something older. Something in the wolf-born part of her that had been quietly keeping its own counsel for 3 years, filed away in the same drawer as the thing she could do in healing sessions that she wasn't supposed to be able to do. That part of her looked at Duskwall and said, with infuriating calm, "Oh, there you are." She told it, firmly, to be quiet. The pack received her with warmth that was so specifically calibrated to not mention the wolf situation that it effectively announced the wolf situation immediately and completely. People smiled too encouragingly. They offered help with her bags with the energy of people who had been briefed. One woman, a tall beta with kind eyes, welcomed her by saying, "We're so glad you're here. Your work is extraordinary," with an emphasis on work that suggested someone had given notes. Zora found it both irritating and, unexpectedly, touching. And then she met Oren. The girl was sitting up in a bed in the pack's healing room, 12 years old, sharp-eyed, and pale in the way of someone whose body has been fighting something for long enough that the fight has become ordinary. She had the specific energy of a child who had decided, as a survival strategy, to be funnier than her circumstances. "Are you the healer lady?" she asked, looking Zora up and down with frank assessment. "I'm the healer. The lady part I'm still working on." Oren grinned. It was a good grin. Wide and slightly crooked, the grin of a kid who meant it. "Alpha Ryland said you don't have a wolf." "Oren," Ryland started from the doorway. "He said it respectfully," Oren added quickly. Zora turned and raised one eyebrow at Ryland with the precision of a surgeon. "I said it factually," Ryland said. She turned back to Oren and crouched until they were eye level, close enough that the girl could see she wasn't being managed, wasn't being performed at, was simply being met where she was. "He's right. I don't shift. But here's what I know. Sometimes the person who understands a locked door best isn't the one with the key. It's the one who spent their whole life figuring out how to open things from the outside." Oren was quiet for a moment, then, "That was really deep." "I know. Can you say it again so I can write it down?" "Let's get you better first. Then we'll make a poster." Oren smiled again, smaller this time, the kind of smile that costs something. That night, long after the pack had settled, and the healing room was quiet, and the only light was the lunar lamp Zora had set up in the west-facing window precisely as requested, she began the first diagnostic session. She worked alone. She always worked alone for the initial reading. Two presences in the space complicated the signal. She prepared the bridge compound with the practiced ease of 3 years and sat beside Oren's sleeping form and let herself go down into the diagnostic state, the deep focused place where her awareness extended and the wolf soul of her patient became, briefly, legible. She had expected something difficult. She had expected the knotted, resistant signature of a physical illness, something systemic and stubborn that would take patience and strategy to map. She found something else entirely. She found a wound, not physical, not systemic. A wound in the architecture of Oren's wolf soul, in the part that governed connection, that opened toward bonds, that reached for other presences the way a plant reaches for light. It had been reaching 18 months ago toward the nearest and brightest presence it knew. And that presence had been gone. And the reaching had found nothing. And the wolf, in its new and terrified and infant understanding of loss, had made a decision. If the first bond breaks, no bonds are safe. Close everything. Let nothing in. Zora sat with this in the quiet of the healing room for a long time. The compound kept the diagnostic state open. She stayed in it. She looked at what Oren's wolf had done to protect itself from a grief it couldn't process and couldn't name, and she felt the specific, quiet devastation of recognition. It was the same wound she had been carrying for 3 years. Just in a wolf that didn't know yet that wounds can close. If this story is already doing something to your chest, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Like this video, hit that subscribe button right now, and drop in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Whether it's midnight in Nigeria or a lunch break in the UK, I want to know you're here. Chapter 3 is where everything breaks open. Don't you dare leave. Chapter 3. She told them the next morning. Not because she wanted to, because Oren deserved to have the people responsible for her understand exactly what they were dealing with, and Zora had never once in her professional life allowed her personal comfort to outrank a patient's need. She sat across from Rylan and Grove at the long kitchen table with her session notes in front of her, and her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had appeared at her elbow before she'd asked for it. She had stopped noticing when that started happening, which was itself something she was not examining. And she told them what she had found in Oren's wolf soul the night before. The grief block, the first emergence, the way Oren's wolf had reached for her mother and found only the shape of where her mother used to be. The decision the wolf had made in that moment of infant devastation. A decision made not from cruelty or damage, but from the purest possible self-protection. If the first bond breaks, no bonds are safe. Close everything. Let nothing in. Grove's jaw tightened when she reached that part. He looked at the table. He did not say anything, but something moved through his face that was not surprise, and was not confusion, and was, Zora noted clinically, and then immediately stopped noting, the specific expression of a person who understood that particular species of loss from the inside. Rylan looked at her for a long moment when she finished. "Can you fix it?" "I can try to show her wolf that bonds are worth the risk," Zora said. "But she'll need to see it, not hear it. Wolf souls don't respond to arguments. They're not persuaded by logic or reassurance. They respond to evidence, to the lived presence of something that proves the thing they've decided isn't true." The table was quiet. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. Zora did not say it either. She picked up her mug and looked at her notes and moved the conversation forward into the practical territory of treatment timelines and compound preparation. And if some part of her had registered, distantly, in the part of her mind that she kept locked and labeled "do not open at work," that she had just described her own methodology for surviving the last 3 years, she gave no indication of it whatsoever. She was a professional. The second week at Duskwall arrived without announcement and settled in like weather. Zora's sessions with Oren ran every other day. Long, careful work that required the hours between them for both of them to recover. On the days in between, Zora prepared compounds, maintained her notes, and existed in Duskwall in a way that she had not fully anticipated, which was to say, comfortably. This was a problem. Comfort required lowering the wall, or so she had always believed. You made yourself comfortable by checking your defenses, by assessing the territory, by making a deliberate and informed decision to relax your guard because the environment had earned it. It was an active process, a chosen one. What was happening instead was that she kept forgetting the wall was there. She would be sitting at the preparation table working on a compound sequence and realize, with a small internal lurch, that she had been humming to herself. Something she had not done in 3 years. She would be eating dinner at the communal table and realize she was mid-sentence in a genuine conversation with a pack elder about lunar tidal patterns without having planned to engage. Small things, ordinary things. The kind of things that happen to people who were, without noticing, beginning to be somewhere rather than simply occupying it. Rylan's care was the kind that didn't announce itself. Tea, always after the long sessions. Appearing at her elbow while she wrote her notes, the temperature exactly right, as though he had timed it to the minute, which she suspected he had. He stayed up late in the evenings. He did not make conversation about it. He simply stayed, reading on the other side of the room while she worked, present in the way that a long-standing fire is present. Warmth that does not demand acknowledgement to keep functioning. One evening, she looked up from her notes and realized she had been sitting in companionable silence with Rylan Ashford for 2 hours and had found it, in some structural way she couldn't immediately explain, restful. She filed this under things that are not happening and went to bed. Grove's care was entirely different and equally effective in ways that irritated her for different reasons. He asked real questions, the kind that required actual answers, not the social performance questions that were really just conversational punctuation. He asked about her mother. He asked what she had liked before she liked healing. He asked what Thorngate smelled like in the summer. He listened with his whole body in the way of someone for whom attention was not a courtesy, but a genuine orientation toward another person. One evening, late, with the fire low and the mountains dark outside the window, he asked, "Do you miss Iron Vale?" "No," she said immediately. And then, because Grove had the specific quality of a person you found yourself being more honest with than you had planned, "I miss the version of my life I thought I was going to have. But that's different from missing the place." "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." She looked at him. "Who did you lose?" The easy warmth in his face didn't disappear. It deepened somehow. Went from the surface down into something older and more careful. "My mate," he said. "4 years ago. Fever. It moved fast. Nothing we tried held it." The fire shifted. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "And Rylan?" Grove continued in a slightly different tone. "Lost the ability to trust that people stay, which he won't tell you directly because Rylan's primary communication method is subtext and shoulder tension." From the armchair across the room, without looking up from his book, Rylan said, "I'm right here." "I know," Grove said cheerfully. "I'm explaining you to someone who should understand you. I'm doing you a service. Your services are frequently unrequested, and yet consistently valuable." Zora looked at the two of them, the one who said everything with the wrong words and the one who said everything without words, and felt the thing that was sitting in the room with all three of them, enormous and warm and nameless, and made the firm executive decision not to look at it directly. But she should have been packing. Her 3 weeks were nearly up. Oren's treatment was progressing, slowly, carefully, the grief block showing the first signs of softening at the edges. But Zora's contracted time was almost done. She had not packed a single thing. She was not, absolutely, categorically not, going to examine why. Night 13 arrived at 2 in the morning, and it arrived screaming. Zora was on her feet before she was fully awake. The healer's reflex, the one that had been trained into her bone deep over 3 years. Moving toward the sound before her mind had finished assembling the context for it. The hallway, the healing room. The door open, light already on inside, 2 of Duskwall's pack healers standing at the edges of the room with the specific stillness of people who know they are out of their depth. Oren was convulsing. Zora assessed in the time it took to cross the room. The grief block was cracking, not opening cleanly the way a treatment progression should, but fracturing, the wolf forcing its own emergence through the weakened barrier with the panicked urgency of something that had been locked in the dark for 18 months and had finally decided it was done waiting. The fracture was violent. The wolf's energy was tearing instead of releasing. Without an anchor, a living, present wolf soul for Oren's wolf to reach toward and find, the emergence would destroy the channel it was trying to open. "I need an alpha anchor, now." She had not looked at the door when she said it. She didn't need to. They were already there. Of course, they were already there. "Both of you," Zora said. "In here, now." "Both," Grove started. "So, double anchor, 2 alpha soul bonds simultaneously. I've only read about it, but the theory is sound, and the alternative is watching her wolf tear itself apart. So I need you to trust me right now, and we can discuss the reading list later." Rylan was already moving to Oren's left side. Grove took the right. They moved around the bed with the wordless coordination of 2 people who had operated in crisis together for years. And Zora felt, watching them, a brief and wholly inconvenient wave of something she identified as faith. The specific, grounded trust of a person who has just confirmed they are not alone in the room. "Take her hands," Zora said. "Both of you, don't shift. Don't push your alpha authority. She's not ready for dominance. She needs presence. Just let her wolf feel that you're there, that you're staying. They did. And then Zora did the thing she had never done. The thing she had filed under doesn't have a name, we'll address later. The thing she had glimpsed in the edges of 3 years of healing sessions and carefully, deliberately, not looked at directly. She reached into her own chest, into the place where the wolf-born instinct lived, even in a body that had never shifted. The place that should have been empty and had never, she understood now, been empty at all. And she served as the third anchor. Not dominant, not directive, a mirror. She let herself go all the way down into the place where Oren's wolf was fracturing, and she brought with her the only thing she had that the wolf soul would recognize. I have been exactly here. I have been the thing that decided no more bonds are safe. I have been closed and locked and certain that opening was the same as dying. And I survived it, and it was worth surviving. Reach. The room went white, not literally, not with light, with something that had no visual component but registered in the body as brightness. A full system, bone-deep recognition that something enormous and important was completing itself. The particular clarity of a thing arriving at its destination after a very long journey. Then Oren gasped. One sharp, full breath, the kind that sounds like a beginning. Her body stilled. The convulsions stopped with the abruptness of a storm ending. That sudden, that complete. In the silence that followed, the healing room filled with a smell that Zora had read about in texts and never experienced directly. The smell of a new wolf, fresh and green and alive. The specific signature of a wolf soul taking its first full breath of existence. Oren's eyes opened, golden, fully shifted in the iris, new and enormous and frightened and awake. Did I do it? She whispered. Zora's throat closed. Yeah, kid, she managed. You did it. And then her legs gave out. She didn't fall. Rylan was simply there. The way he was always, she was beginning to understand. Simply there. And then she was in the hallway, sitting against the wall, and Grove's voice was behind her in the healing room, keeping Oren calm. And Rylan was crouched in front of her, and the anchor procedure's after effect was hitting her the way a wave hits something that forgot to brace. It was not physical pain. It was the wall. The wall, which she had forgotten was there, and then accessed at its deepest structural level to serve as a mirror for Oren's wolf soul, had cracked open. Not been lowered. Cracked. From the inside, and everything she had stored behind it for 3 years was doing what stored things do when the container breaks. She was crying before she knew she'd started. I didn't shift, she said, which was not the sentence she had meant to say. I've never shifted. Not once. I don't have... There's nothing there. There's supposed to be nothing there. And I used something that... Zora. I was told I had nothing. I was stood in a clearing in a white dress and told in front of 200 people that I was insufficient, that I was wolfless, that I was a stain. I know. And it has been 3 years, and I built something. I made something real, and I told myself I was fine, and I am fine. I am completely fine. Her voice broke on the last word in a way she had not permitted it to break in 3 years. I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know I had that. Rylan set her gently against the wall, and then he crouched in front of her, lowered himself to her eye level with the deliberate care of someone who understood that this moment required no height, no authority, no compression. And his face, for the first time since she had known him, was completely unguarded. You're not without a wolf, he said. You never were. She looked at him. The old records call it soul right, he said. A wolf-born whose power doesn't live in the shift. It lives in connection, in the ability to read wolf souls, to enter them, to serve as a bridge between them. There are perhaps 4 alive in the world at any given time. The reason no one identified it in you is that soul rights look from the outside like wolf-born who failed to shift, until they do what you just did in there, and then it becomes unmistakable. She stared at him. How long have you known? Since your first session with Oren. Why didn't you? Because told to you, it's information, he said simply. Discovered? It's truth. Those are different things. You needed to find it yourself. She looked at him for a long moment. You're insufferable, she said. I've been told. Rylan. Thank you. Something moved through his jaw, the specific tightening she had come to recognize as the thing his face did when it was processing something it didn't have a system for yet. He looked at her for a moment that was several seconds longer than was strictly necessary, and then said quietly, We want you to stay. She stilled. Both of us, he said. I know it's not. We understand it's not conventional, and we're not asking you to decide anything tonight. But I want you to know that what we want is for you to stay. Zora Ashvale, who was a soul right, who had never wanted a wolf and had one all along, who had built a life from 2 words and a bag and $40 and the accidental kindness of a grumpy old witch, looked at this man crouched in a hallway, treating her eye level like it was sacred ground. I have never once in my life wanted conventional, she said. The ghost of something enormous crossed Rylan Ashford's face. Something that, on another man, in better light, you might have called a smile. 3 days later, Oren was recovering beautifully. She had asked for the poster-making supplies twice already. Zora had not packed a single thing. And then, on a cold morning that smelled of pine and incoming weather, one of the pack's border wolves came through the main hall door at a pace that was not quite running and was not quite not running. There's a man at the gate, he said. He came alone, no escort. He set a travel identification card on the table. Zora was across the room. She couldn't read the name from where she stood. She looked up instead, automatically, at Rylan, who was closest to the table, who had already picked up the card, whose eyes had moved across it in the single second it took to read a name. Rylan's face went still. Not the ordinary stillness. Not the compression she had come to read as his baseline. This was different. This was the particular quality of stillness that arrives just before something structural gives way. The held breath moment before the crack. The kind of still that meant something was about to break. Chapter 4. Zora crossed the room. She picked up the card from the table where Rylan had set it down with the careful deliberateness of a man placing something he wanted to be able to walk away from. She read the name printed on it in the standard travel font of the Interterritory Identification System. Clean, official, completely ordinary. Caden Voss, Alpha, Iron Veil Pack. The recognition that moved through her was not love. She wanted to be precise about that, even in the privacy of her own chest. It was not love, had not been love for a long time. Perhaps had not been love for longer than she had admitted to herself while she was still inside it. What it was, instead, was body memory. The specific, cellular remembrance of cold ground under bare feet. A white dress. 200 faces that would not meet her eyes. 2 words spoken in her own voice. I accept. She set the card down. She went to the window. Rylan and Grove were already at the gate. They had moved while she was reading, with the quiet efficiency of two people who had spent years making decisions together in the half-second before a situation required them. She watched their body language shift as Caden came through the entrance. The change was not dramatic. It was the particular, controlled adjustment of two large and dangerous things that have decided, for now, to be patient. Grove's easy posture closed slightly. Rylan went very still in the specific way that was not stillness at all, but compression. Everything gathered inward, everything attending. She understood, watching them, that they had known his name before today. Of course they had. They were alphas. They had come to Thorngate specifically for her, which meant they had researched her, which meant they had found the pack records, the rejection notation, the name of the man who had stood her in a clearing and called her a stain. They had known from the beginning. They had brought her here knowing she could go back upstairs. She could let them handle whatever this was. She could remain, professionally and personally, uninvolved. She was not a woman who hid from her own story. She went downstairs. Caden Voss had changed in 3 years in the way that consequence changes people. Not dramatically, not in ways that were immediately visible, but in the deeper architecture. He was thinner. Something behind his eyes had the quality of a man who had not been sleeping well for a long time and had stopped expecting to. He had come without an escort, which was either humility or desperation, and looking at him now, Zora thought it was probably both, and that both were probably warranted. He saw her when she came through the door. Something moved across his face that she could not name and did not particularly want to. Zora. Caden. A pause. He looked at her the way people look at things they expected to find diminished and have found instead, disconcertingly, otherwise. You look, don't, she said. Tell me why you're here. He told her. Riva was dying. Not quickly, not the dramatic, sudden kind of dying that at least had the mercy of resolution. The slow kind. The bond they had formed was built on a political foundation rather than a true mate connection. And Riva had a fated mate elsewhere. A wolf on the eastern coast she had never met. A never known. And the suppressed pull of the real bond fighting against the forced one had created a feedback loop that her body was losing. Ironvale's healers had exhausted their methods. 3 specialists. Nothing held. The supernatural healing network, quietly and circuitously, had produced a name. There are 4 soul rights alive in the world, Caden said. His voice was stripped of everything except the bare fact of what he was asking. The network said you're one of them. I didn't know that when... He stopped. Started again. I am asking you to save the woman I chose over you. I know exactly what I'm asking. I know I have no standing to ask it. I know there is nothing I can say in this room that will be adequate to what I did. I'm asking anyway. The room was very quiet. Zora stood in it and let the quiet exist for a moment without filling it. She thought of Oren's wolf in the white room, the one that had decided no more bonds were safe, the one she had sat with in the dark and told, I have been exactly here, and it was worth surviving. She thought of Riva, whom she had never met, who was 25 years old, who was in pain that had nothing to do with anything she had chosen. How old is Riva? Zora asked. 25. Is she in pain? Yes. Zora nodded once. Then I'll go. Grove said, We'll go. Rylan said, Obviously, in the flat, unhurried tone of a man for whom the decision had been made before the conversation started. Caden looked at them, at the 2 enormous men standing on either side of the woman he had once declared insufficient in front of his entire pack, to flanking her with the unconscious, unperformed ease of people who had already decided where they stood. Something moved through his face that had the quality, Zora thought, of a reckoning. Not punishment. Not the dramatic weight of narrative consequence. Just the quiet, adult arrival of understanding what you cost someone, measured against what they became anyway. He had the grace to look ashamed. "Thank you," he said. "Don't," Zora said. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for her, and because the moon goddess has a very specific sense of humor, and I have spent 3 years learning to respect that about her." Riva Dorn was 25 years old and frightened, and in the particular kind of pain that had been going on long enough to become the baseline of her existence, the thing she woke up inside of and moved through every day. She was also, Zora discovered within the first hour of working with her, genuinely kind. Grateful in a way that had nothing to do with Caden and everything to do with being a person who had been suffering and had just been told someone was going to try. "I don't know what I did to deserve any of this," Riva said on the first evening quietly. "You didn't," Zora said. "Some situations aren't about deserving. They're just what happened. We work with what happened." Riva looked at her. "Are you always this direct?" "I've been told it's one of my better qualities." "Who told you that?" "Someone with a very low doorframe." She worked for 2 days. The bond unwinding was meticulous, delicate work, the kind that required her full soul-right capacity. The thing she was still learning the edges of, still understanding the weight and reach of. She moved through Riva's wolf soul with care, finding the threads of the forced bond and separating them from the underlying tissue of Riva's true self, with the patience of someone who understood that rushed healing was just damage with better intentions. On the second day, in the deep focus of the final unwinding sequence, something happened that was not in any text she had read. She felt it before she understood it. A warmth, moving through the working from a direction she hadn't expected, and then the recognition arriving a half-second later, like a translation catching up to the original language. The rejection bond. Her rejection bond. The one she had carried for 3 years in the left side of her neck. The faded scar that Grove had read in the car on the road north. The bone-deep mark of insufficient, wolfless stain. The moon goddess's mechanics surfacing through the work like something that had been waiting for exactly this configuration. A rejection bond, when the rejector is present and the rejected has reached genuine healing, can be offered for reabsorption. Not repaired, not reformed, not given back. Dissolved, completely finally, like a scar whose work is finished, whose purpose was survival, and whose purpose has been served. The 3-year ache lifted. It did not lift because Caden took it back. He did not get to take it back. Words said in cruelty in front of 200 witnesses do not get unsaid, do not get retrieved, do not become something other than what they were. That was not what happened. What happened was simpler and more absolute. She no longer needed it. The scar had been, in its way, a record, and proof that she had survived something real. Evidence, kept in the body, that the clearing had happened and she had walked out of it and kept walking. But she had Duskwall now. She had Oren's golden eyes opening in a white room. She had 3 years of brilliant, difficult, genuine work. She had Grove's laugh and Ryland's tea and the specific, irreplaceable knowledge of what she was and had always been. She had gotten here without the scar. She didn't need the record anymore. She wept in the healing room while Riva slept, and the work settled into completion. Briefly, privately, with the quiet completeness of someone releasing something they have been carrying for so long they had forgotten they were carrying it. Then she washed her face at the small basin in the corner. dried it with the cloth folded beside it, looked at herself in the water's surface for one moment. Then she walked out. Caden was in the hall. He stood when she came through the door. Stood with the instinctive, slightly desperate attention of a man who has been waiting for news and has been waiting long enough to have rehearsed several different versions of how to receive it. "It's done," Zora said. "She'll need 2 weeks of rest. She'll feel the pull toward her true mate within a month. Don't suppress it when she does. Let it come." Caden exhaled. Something in his posture dropped, the held tension of weeks, releasing all at once. He looked at her with an expression that was working toward words and finding all of them inadequate. "I don't," Zora said. Not harshly, not with the weight of 3 years pressing behind it. Simply, "You'll say something, and it won't be enough. And we'll both know it isn't enough, and we'll both feel the weight of that, and it still won't be enough. So don't." She looked at him for a moment. At the boy who had shared apples at the river, at the man who had made a terrible decision in a clearing, at the person who was going to have to live with the shape of it. "Lead your pack well. Be better than you were. That's all there is." He nodded. She walked out. Rylan was leaning against the wall outside the door. He had tea. Of course he had tea. "How?" Zora said, taking it. "Do you always have tea?" "I pay attention," he said. She leaned against the wall beside him. Their shoulders touched, not dramatically, not with the weight of announcement, just the simple, easy contact of two people who had stopped maintaining the careful distance between them. The corridor was quiet. From somewhere further in the building, she could hear Grove talking to someone in the low, easy cadence of a man who could make anyone feel that the conversation they were currently having was the one he had most wanted to have today. "I'm ready to go home," Zora said. She felt Rylan look at her. "Thorngate?" he said. She considered the word home, what it had meant at 23, standing at Iron Vale's border with $40 in a bag. What it had meant in Thorngate, built slowly from nothing into something real and good and hers. What it meant now, standing in a corridor in Iron Vale with her shoulder against the shoulder of a man who paid attention. "No," she said. "Duskwall." The enormous, quiet thing settled on Rylan Ashford's face. She watched it arrive. The thing that was not quite a smile, but was everything a smile was made of. The full weight of it moving through his expression like light through deep water. Slow and total, and reaching all the way down. "Good," he said. Back in Duskwall, someone had put curtains up in her room. West-facing, lunar-appropriate, in a deep blue that she would not have chosen, and that was, inexplicably, exactly right. Her herb supplies had been reorganized by someone who had clearly read her system and understood it. On the desk, propped against the wall where she would see it immediately upon entering, was a piece of paper decorated with hand-drawn stars and uneven lettering in the confident script of a 12-year-old who had recently discovered she had golden eyes. "You are the door and also the key." "Wise healer. Lady Zora," she said I could make this. Zora stood in the room and held the poster. She did not cry. She cried a little. That evening, the three of them sat on the wide stone steps outside the main hall as the mountain range went dark in increments. The pack's lights coming on one by one below them, like small, deliberate decisions against the coming night. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and the particular cold that arrives in the mountains with the specific intention of being bracing, rather than merely uncomfortable. Grove had been quiet for approximately 4 minutes, which was unusual, and which Zora had learned meant he was preparing something. "I have a question," he said. "No," Zora said. "It's an important question." The answer is still no. When you walked into the apothecary, Grove said, with the focused determination of a man who has been saving this for the right moment and has decided this is unambiguously it. And the very first complete sentence out of your mouth was, "Gosh, you both are huge." Were you referring, at that time, to our physical stature in general, or specifically to— "I was referring," Zora said, with enormous and immaculate dignity, "to your heights. Of course. Your excessive, unnecessary, architecturally inconsiderate heights. Naturally. That is the complete and total extent of what I meant, and I will not be elaborating." "Absolutely. The end." "Of course." Grove nodded gravely. "Although, for what it's worth—" "Grove, I'm just saying, I will put something in your tea." "She means it," Rylan said, without looking up. "She's a trained lunar alchemist. Don't test her." "You hit your head on my doorframe," Zora said, turning to Rylan with the precision of someone who has been saving this counter-argument. "Twice, on the same doorframe, in the same week." "Those are low doorframes," Rylan said. "They are standard doorframes. Then the standard is incorrect." "Rylan, the doorframe is not the problem." "The doorframe," Rylan said, with the absolute unshakable certainty of a man who has committed fully to a position, "is the problem." Grove looked at Zora. "He's been like this since he was 7. You don't get used to it, but at some point you begin to find it structurally comforting. I can't fully explain it." Zora looked at the mountains, at the pack lights below, at Oren's window, where a lamp was burning, where a 12-year-old girl with golden eyes was probably making more posters. She thought of Ogden, of camphor and strong opinions, and the bread in the oven, and the Thursday evenings, and everything that had been built in Thorngate from 2 words and $40, and the stubborn, improbable refusal to be finished. "Ogden is going to need an invitation," she said. "Already sent," Grove said. She looked at him. "You already—" "I liked the sound of him. I wanted to meet the man who called you the bread for 3 years." "He's going to be difficult. We're co-alphas of a northern mountain pack. We have handled difficult things." He once told a regional health inspector that his opinions were aggressively uninformed, and then offered him a tincture for his blood pressure. A pause. Grove looked at Rylan. Rylan looked at Grove. "We might," Rylan said slowly, "be in some trouble." Zora laughed. "The real kind. Us, the kind that lived in the ribs." And Rylan's face did the thing it had been doing more frequently lately. The thing that was not quite a smile, and was everything a smile was built from. And Grove grinned with the full warmth of a man who had been waiting a long time for an evening that felt exactly like this one. "You're staying," Rylan said quietly. Not a question, not a request. An anchor, set gently, with both hands, the way you set something you intend to hold. Zora looked at the mountains going dark, at the lights coming on, at the life taking shape around her, large and warm and gloriously, improbably hers. "I'm staying," she said. "So, here is what I want you to take with you when you leave this story." Zora Ashvale was told at 23 that she was insufficient, wolfless, a stain. She was told this publicly, permanently, by someone she had trusted with the tender and irreplaceable thing of being known. And she accepted it. Not because she believed it, but because she understood, in that moment, that arguing with someone who has already decided the verdict is not a conversation. It is just more pain. So she said 2 words, and she left, and she built something from nothing in a city that didn't ask questions, and she became extraordinary at a thing no one expected her to be capable of, and she carried a wound for 3 years that she didn't know she was strong enough to live beyond. And then the moon goddess, who had been watching the whole time, who had been furious on her behalf the whole time, who had been doing what the moon goddess does with the ones she is not finished with yet, sent her 2 enormous alphas, a 12-year-old girl with a grief-locked wolf, and the one situation in the world that could only be resolved by someone who had survived exactly what Zora had survived. She didn't heal Oren despite her wound. She healed Oren because of it. She didn't save Riva in spite of what Caden did. She saved Riva through the person that what Caden did had required her to become. That is what the moon goddess was cooking. That is what took so long. Some bread is not slow because something is wrong with it. Some bread is slow because what it is becoming requires time that cannot be rushed, heat that cannot be skipped, a process that looks, from the outside, like nothing is happening, right up until the moment it is done. You are not broken because the world couldn't read you. You are just still becoming. And that, in the end, is enough. It's more than enough. It always was. And that, right there, is the story. If something in this landed for you, if you felt Zora's clearing, or Oren's golden eyes, or the weight of that hallway, then you already know what to do. Like this video. Hit that subscribe button, and I mean right now, before the next thing pulls you away. Because the stories we tell in this space are built for exactly the person who made it to the end of this one. The person who stayed. The person who needed to see how it finished. Drop in the comments where you're watching from, whether it's 2 a.m. in Lagos, or a Sunday morning in London, or a lunch break somewhere in between. I want to know you're here. You're not watching alone. And if this story did something to your chest that you weren't expecting, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear that they are not broken, that they are still becoming. I'll see you in the next one.